All right, good morning, everybody. We are about to get started in just a moment. We'll wait for a few more people to trickle in. But can everybody, before we get started, can everybody see the screen? All right, perfect. All right, so thank you again to everybody for attending the webinar this afternoon or morning. My name is Kelly Williams, and I am with Paige and Paxton. And so Paige and Paxton is a line of early elementary resources to help expose kids to big concepts in science, technology, engineering, math, also known as STEM. And the reason why we actually hold these webinars, in addition to providing our resources to school systems and classroom, is that we see that there is a need to share best practices about how to introduce them early and often to kids when they're actually most receptive to it versus waiting later down the pipeline where where we see that kids fall off in their interests around science and math, engineering, etc. And so that is why, so we hold these monthly webinars in order to give you guys the tools and resources and the opportunity to connect directly with people who are doing these best practices, who have been there and done that and do this every day, so that you can bring that back to your school systems and classrooms. One of the things that we actually released recently was a new character to the Paige and Paxton crew. So Paige loves science, Paxton loves technology, and now we have Penelope, who was actually released during Engineer Week in February and on Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day. And so what she does is what Penelope does is take kids on a path of discovery to introduce kids to the wonders of engineering, which are all around kids, but they may not even realize it. So we're really excited to welcome Penelope to the crew. And then also later down the pipeline, we'll actually be introducing a new character, which will focus on the M part of the acronym. So definitely stay tuned. But as we talk about engineering, one of the people who I think is really leading the way in terms of applying engineering practices in elementary classrooms is Bren, who will be our speaker today. She is actually the STEM coordinator of Granville County Public Schools in North Carolina. And she's here to share with us some of the ways that she has been able to pull together different resources in order to create a really great engineering experience for her youngest students in her school system. So without further ado, I will introduce Bren to the group, and she can take it from here.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'll just say that on my end, I'm just seeing your main screen. I'm not seeing the PowerPoint deck.
Let's see. Can you see it now?
No. It still just says approaching STEM from different angles with the Paige and Paxton icon.
Let's see. Show main screen. And then we have this. Can you see that?
It's the same screen.
Let's see. Can you see it now?
Yes, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. So yeah, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be on the call. My name is Bryn. I'm the STEM coordinator for Grenville County Schools. And so what that means is I work directly with 3 of our schools, 2 elementary, and then we're growing into middle school with the rising 5th grade class of last year, which is when we started our STEM program. We started our STEM program mostly because we needed to adapt. We had some elementary schools, we're a pretty rural district, and we had some schools that were in danger of closing. And so rather than redrawing district lines, we wanted to really dive into a STEM program as a way to attract kids all over our county to come to these farther out schools, but also as a chance to really innovate and provide options for our families. And so that's just a little bit of the context of why we started the STEM program. In addition to, we have some individuals on our instructional team that deeply believe, myself included, deeply believe in the power and potential of STEM to be a game changer for a lot of our students, to really shift their lifelong trajectories, and to be positioned to be creative problem solvers who love coming to school and getting to have a hands-on creative experience in the classroom. So those are some of our students. You can see they're actually doing an earth materials engineering challenge in that picture there. They're testing soil, sand, and clay samples to design mortar. So the fundamental cornerstone of our approach to STEM incorporation, especially in the early childhood classrooms, is utilizing the engineering design process. We learned about the EGP, as we call it, through the engineering curriculum that we incorporate, which is Engineering is Everywhere with the Boston Museum of Science. But the engineering design process is really just a pretty simple problem-solving process that guides kids through how to solve any problem. They start by asking questions, and that's when we'll do a lot of explorations really grounded in science. So in this, you see our class plan on designing an object on how to trap the gingerbread man. And so when we asked questions, we needed to learn more about the gingerbread man. And so we read stories about the gingerbread man, and we needed to ask questions about how different materials worked. And so they got to explore how sticky the tape was, and how they could bend pipe cleaners, and how pulleys worked. And so there's a lot of exploration and scientific knowledge that's gained, schema that's built during the ask phase. Then we have kids imagine, and so that's where whether it's a behavior strategy or whether it's designing a new engineering technology, we have kids as individuals draw pictures or talk through, make videos, and brainstorm ways that they can solve that problem. We always have them think of multiple strategies, and we always have them do it independently first, so that every kid has a chance to have their voice heard a little bit and prepare. The third is the plan, and that's when we come together as a team. They share their brainstorms, and they make a plan. Usually this includes a diagram, so you can see our labeled parts and materials, and it includes a materials list. Then they create and test, and then we improve. And so they're learning that failure is normal, that's how engineers and scientists learn and grow. And it is a problem-solving structure that in our schools we're really doing our due diligence to incorporate it in all aspects of the child's educational experience, not just in science or engineering or math. So in math, they use the engineering design process to solve word problems, or to figure out how to solve a problem. In writing, instead of brainstorming, we imagine, and instead of drafting, we plan. Instead of improving, we revise and edit. And so we really create that shared vocabulary so that kids can really internalize this process as a way to position them as the future problem solvers of tomorrow. With our early childhood, we really use this a lot within literacy. And so here you can see an example of one approach. The kids made a sticky web that trapped their gingerbread man that had a door that goes behind it. They engineered ways to get letters balancing on top of different trees when they read Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. We engineered the houses from the Three Little Pigs. And so with our early childhood, we really use literacy and those cornerstone texts that kids love and that our teachers are already using as ways to begin to explore the engineering design process with our students. The other thing that you may have noticed is that was a class plan. And so when we have our older grade levels, they must maintain science, math, and engineering notebooks where they're incorporating nonfiction writing and diagram making and note-taking and all of those levels of writing comprehension. In our kindergarten classes in the first week of school, that's not necessarily an appropriate choice, and so our teachers modify and do a shared writing or a shared brainstorming to really begin to model those skills and model that thinking strategy. So we do use Engineering is Elementary and Engineering Adventures as key components of our engineering curriculum. What we found is a lot of our elementary teachers, for them, engineering is very foreign. It's not something that most of us were taught growing up. And so these are units that we've bought from the Boston Museum of Science, but then we do the work to adapt and align with our ongoing science curriculum. They do incorporate mathematics in a really tangible, concrete, data-oriented manner. The engineering adventures are ones that are free curriculum, open source, and that's where we use with pre-K. We adapt it for chemical engineering. For first grade, the aerospace engineering kit with rockets and rovers, and then ongoing. We do roll it up, so by the time kids enter first grade, they're doing one engineering kit, which takes about 3 weeks to do for every 6 weeks of science. And you can see our science content for the first grade, force and motion and space. And then with mortar, it's the soil, sand, and clay. With plant packages, it's kids learning the plant components. And civil engineering was an additional force and motion as they explored gravity and structures. For kindergarten, we only do 2. The kits are pretty intense, and so we do smaller engineering challenges that we design in the first 9 weeks and the third 9 weeks of school. And then we do a mechanical engineering windmill challenge and an agricultural engineering hand pollinator challenge in the second and fourth quarters. And with pre-K, we do lots of exploration activities. So we'll do lots of smaller, igniting curiosity, hands-on, station-based, small group, large group. It's more about positioning them in a place where they can explore and, as Ms. Frizzle would say, get messy. But we do want to expose them to the full design challenge idea and the idea of a scope and sequence of structured and scaffolded lessons that position them to be problem solvers. And so in June, when it's hot and we want to be messy and outside, we do a bubble wand challenge where they get to explore properties of bubbles. So the engineering design process, like I said earlier, is one of our main cornerstones in how we make choices of incorporating lots of different components of engineering. The engineering habits of mind is our other main guidelines. So the engineering habits of mind are 6 characteristics that we cultivate with our students. We don't imagine that our students will leave 5th grade or will leave our middle school programs all wanting to be engineers, although we hope more of them do. But we expect that they all leave 5th grade being able to think creatively. So creativity is one, collaboration, the ability to work in teams. We do a lot intentionally, and Lego robotics is one way that we really specifically target collaboration, because we'll have kids who say things like, I can't work with so-and-so, or, I get really mad at teamwork. But then you put a Lego robot in front of them and you say, you've got to work together to be able to do this, to be able to participate, and all of a sudden we can work as a team, and we've proven it's possible. Communication is another one of the habits of mind. So we do a lot of modeling and interjection as teachers. We position ourselves as coaches. So after kids make their brainstorm ideas, they need help figuring out how do we take 3 distinct ideas and create one product. And so developmentally, that's really challenging. And so one of the things we do with pre-K and K, we work in pairs. That way they're only combining 2 ideas, and then we gradually move into a 3-person collaboration. But we do a lot of modeling in how do we evaluate who has the best idea, and how do we use data, and how do we do something that's fair when they're in that period of their life where justice and fairness is very important. So we model and practice how to take parts of ideas from each other. Optimism is the idea that we don't get frustrated when something doesn't work right. It's also demonstrating for kids that mistakes are okay and there's not a right answer. So we really encourage, so the example that you can see here is they're demolishing their walls. The first time that kids do this, they design both the mortar and how they stack their walls. And a lot of times kids' walls crumble right away. And so all of our challenges, we have an improved step as well, where they redo the whole challenge. And in that case, they can really see how engineers learn from failure and how failure isn't something to be afraid of, but it really encourages them to take risks. Ethics and systems thinking are the other components of the engineering habits of mind. So in all of these challenges, we want to position students to see how to make ethical choices, how to be considerate of the environment and be considerate of their impact on the environment. One of the biggest foundations of engineering that I've seen is with our female students, especially. Girls are motivated into career paths. There have been some studies that have come out of NC State that show that girls are motivated by the ability to enact change. And we don't talk about STEM in that way a lot of times. Like, boys are drawn to it typically, not all boys, but most boys are drawn to the fields of STEM because of the hands-on nature, because of the tinker persona, because of the robots and the lasers, and it's cool and fun, and we have a lot in our society that encourages boys into that path. But with girls, it's the ability to create change, and so positioning them as problem solvers who can actually really help people through their engineering is an important component that we encourage. And the last is systems thinking, helping students understand that there are trade-offs in the world and that pieces are reliant and interdependent on one another. The final thing with our habits of mind is we're just beginning. We're year 2 of our STEM program right now. And so we're just beginning to dip our toes into the tinker/maker space. And we're really excited about that for our pre-KK especially. So much of that is, one, already what our teachers are doing, but two, positioning students to have time and space to explore and to get messy and to make what it is they want to make and create these inventions that nobody else has ever created. I've often been surprised by my kindergartners who, when they imagine, their imagines are so creative that I often have to go and collect more and more resources because the kids come up with something that I never ever would have imagined. And so we have to sit together and talk and figure out what materials they need in order to make their imaginations come to fruition. So developmentally appropriate practice is something that I really wanted to incorporate as we had this conversation, because one of the things, you hear Lego robotics with kindergartners and you go, can they really code? Can they really manipulate those tiny pieces? Can they really work in teams of 3? And with our kindergarten and pre-K teachers especially, making sure that we maintained developmentally appropriate expectations for our students as we introduced a new and rigorous and innovative curriculum was a validly important consideration to include. And so it's something with our pre-K and K, especially as we go through, like, how do we craft our STEM program? We consider the design process, we consider the habits of mind, and then we consider what is most developmentally appropriate for your classroom and your kids at this point of the year. Thanks, Kelly. One of the resources that we really use is NACCE, the National Academy for Educating Young Children. And one article that I would encourage you all to Google is the 10 tips to support children's science learning. It's really having a question-driven approach. So when we adapt the chemical engineering bubble kit for our students, we're really using questions to drive their exploration. So kids are going to be asking, like, how do I get a bubble to land on the ground without it popping? Or how do I make a bubble into a different shape than a sphere? Or just even allowing them to generate the questions and using that as a starting off point. Exploring and finding answers together. So positioning as a team, as a class, us to do some explorations, giving kids time and space to explore. We've seen a lot of that. We used foam pipe insulators to build ramps in our pre-K class. Lots with magnets, lots with chemical reactions. Kids are really into, like, making potions. I just realized I'm doing air quotes and you can't see that through the webinar. So, but they enjoy positioning themselves as scientists and as the ones to get to do. And therefore, as teachers, we have to accept that explorations are often messy, and we have to learn from mistakes together and be curious together. So one of the things that our schools all have done is we actually have a set-aside STEM lab. And for teachers, that's been really good because, one, they don't have to take the time and turn the classroom into a space where they have to worry about the walls being covered in clay and soil, or about the exploding baking soda, or the borax glue food coloring potion. But to have a space that can be messy, that is near sinks, where teachers can bring their kids, and it can be this set-aside space, has actually been incredibly important in building investment amongst our staff, and in making this a program that's sustainable and meaningful for teachers, where they still can go back and step right into their literacy centers and allow their days to move forward smoothly. Reggio Emilia is an approach that I've seen in a lot of our early childhood schools. Our district doesn't actually use it, but it is something that I would say, like, if you are somebody who is an early child educator who is wondering, like, is STEM appropriate for my kids, I would really encourage you to explore the Reggio Emilia approach. They have a high focus on investigations, inquiry, learning from nature, and positioning students as problem solvers through community-based inquiry. That is STEM. Here in North Carolina, there's actually two definitions of STEM that the state operates with. One is science, technology, engineering, and math. The other is strategies that engage minds. And so if we think of the ideal vision of an early childhood classroom, we want kids recording observations. We want the clipboard by the science center where kids are looking at leaves, or when they're looking at insects in the little, the butterfly net pop-up thing. Like, we want to extend, we want them to take pictures and draw diagrams and explore the what might happens, and we want kids to get messy. And so that's often something that I feel like as teachers, as we get more and more towards sort of a testing-based approach, we've lost that sense of curiosity and joy. And that's really where developmentally appropriate practice can be a tool that you can use almost as an excuse to go back to this phase of inquiry, as opposed to something that makes you feel like I can't do STEM. It's too rigorous. Often it's just shifting our paradigm and putting kids back in the driver's seats of their own curiosity and explorations, and as teachers positioning ourselves more as coaches, and being okay with the mess. The last thing that we use, and we don't actually use this with our pre-K class, but we do use a resource called Define STEM. One of our other guidelines in our STEM curriculum is to really incorporate more project-based learning, where kids are the drivers of inquiry. They're creating meaningful products as opposed to filling in bubble sheets that demonstrate evidence of their learning. So for our students, after they do about the 6 weeks of science and then about 3 weeks of engineering, we do have a cumulative project where they can explore an additional facet of that topic. They can create a book or an online video or a diorama or a prototype of an invention that shows an application of what they've learned. And we've really found that been meaningful and appropriate for our younger students, to give them an opportunity to synthesize all that they've experienced, to create those interdisciplinary connections, and position them as a place where they can use what they've done in science and in engineering to create some really awesome written work, and helping them make those connections across the curriculum. And so for them, it's been really important to provide the time and space for them to make sense of what they just experienced, rather than just quickly moving on from kit to kit and science to science and unit to unit, and they need that time to process what it is they just did, so they can even see the scope of their work, of their effort. So I just blitzed through a lot. I will say that we do use Paige and Paxton in our pre-K and K programs, and we found that that's helpful. In addition to other literacy, there's more and more STEM books that are coming out, and so we have enjoyed the use of the books and the puzzles in our pre-K and K classrooms, in addition to the literacy-based challenges, our engineering is elementary kits, using the design process and the habits of mind, and making sure that we're encouraging inquiry, and developmentally appropriate practice. So with that, I'll turn it over to some Q&A.
Hello, everybody. So if you have any questions, please just go ahead and ask the question in your question section on your control panel. So we actually have one question that already popped in. So
Okay.
one of the questions is, how long did it take for you to implement this approach?
So we're in year 2 of our STEM program. One of the things that the state of North Carolina has is the Department of Public Instruction actually has published a STEM program rubric that gives guidelines and phases of STEM implementation. So there's developing, early, prepared, and model status. And so in year 2, our schools, in the 11 attributes of STEM program, we're at about a developing to prepared phase throughout the 11 attributes. So we're not at a place even yet where we're like saying we've got this going. There's one elementary school in the state of North Carolina that's been declared that it's at a prepared status, and they had been doing a STEM program for 7 years before they reached that. So we're in year 2. Our first year, we set really incremental goals. So the first semester, we were surviving the engineering kits, and we were working on really aligning our science and engineering curriculum. In the second semester, we prioritized really emphasizing the habits of mind and the design process into our other subjects and into the whole day so that kids could see engineering as this interdisciplinary cornerstone as opposed to, you know, the 1 hour that I get to go to STEM lab today. In our second year of the program, we've prioritized more incorporation of the project-based learning, the ongoing work in teams, and we, in the beginning of the year, really focused on the nonfiction writing component, positioning students to make observations, to be more generative, and to have more meaningful products associated with their work as opposed to a very process-oriented staff. And then here in our second 9 weeks, or our second semester this year, in year 2, we're actually focusing on explicit incorporation of math and really linking the E and the M of STEM. So one example, our 4th graders were building maglev trains, models, not real ones, and we actually had students in an unprompted way figure out the area of the track, figure out the area of the magnets that they were using, and use that to create their materials list in a way where they knew exactly how many magnets they could fit to maximize the magnetic force in their maglev tracks. So we've been having this structure of goals. I work with my 3 different principals to prioritize what my coaching looks like with staff and students, whether I'm a co-teacher, a lateral coach, material prep, teacher support during planning, whole staff meeting, and even then just monitoring our district-wide process in progressing along the STEM rubric. So yeah, we're in year 2, and I'd say from our perspective, we've got a lot of ways to go, but we've also been deeply surprised at the progress that we've made in such a short time.
So we have a question from Leslie. She said, excellent presentation. What's your response to folks who are using the acronym STEAM and incorporating the arts?
Yeah, so in our district, one, STEAM is copywritten, and so if we had wanted to do a full STEAM program, it actually cost a great deal more than investing in the EIE curriculum, and so that's just transparently why we made that choice. I deeply support the incorporation of the arts and see through a lot of our challenges individual strengths of students being able to manifest through the aesthetic of whatever it is that they create. And so I would say, like, personally, I encourage it. I think it's a beautiful collection or collaboration, really, integration, especially if you focus on math. There's so much within pattern making and numeracy and geometry where art is deeply linked with math, and that can be a beautiful collaboration. So for us, like, we are behind a place where we're saying, like, STEAM and STEM are different. However, that's really where we are encouraged by North Carolina's approach to STEM as strategies that engage minds, and we think that that what kids create during engineering should be beautiful. Our second grade do visual representations of bird calls in their acoustical engineering unit when they are studying the science of sound, and that is some incredible, odd, abstract art that occurs. And so it's definitely something that we include and incorporate, and I think especially in our pre-K and K classrooms when they have a little bit more freedom to include art in an ongoing manner in the classroom, it makes a ton of sense, and it absolutely continues the position of having kids explore how things work, how do I demonstrate evidence of my learning, and how am I able to record my observations in a variety of ways.
Nice. James, we have a question from James. So he's asking, what standard performance expectations are you using to gauge the preparation of pre-K students for kindergarten?
So our pre-K teachers use, it actually varies on my school, and I'm not gonna, I don't work as closely with my pre-K on that realm. I do know that we've had Ecker's observations come in. I do know, I don't know what our pre-K teachers use, honestly. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, hopefully, well, maybe we can follow up with James later.
Yes, I can follow up with Ms. Strickland and Ms. Norwood and find out.
No worries. We have a question from Rachel. So she's asking, how much teacher prep did this require, and were there any challenges?
Yeah, it's a lot of teacher prep. And so one of the things, if we have administrative or district representatives on the call, I would highly encourage investing in a STEM coordinator. I think that's made the job easier on our teachers, that I can do a lion's share of preparation for them. It looks different with my different schools. One of my schools has only about 14 teachers, and one of my schools has about 40. And so that teacher preparation looks a little different. It involves, we've had a couple of day-long trainings where we introduce them to the design process. We introduce them to the National Academy of Engineers grand challenges of engineering. And those are still, there are 20 problems that engineers across the board and universities are articulating that if they solve, it would dramatically shift how our society operates. So things like providing clean water everywhere, having inexpensive access to solar energy, reverse engineering the brains, creating better medicines. So there's all these challenges. And so developing teachers on their comfort level within the design process, the habits of mind, the grand challenges, was a couple of days of PD over the summer. Then with each 9-week arc, where it's the 6 weeks of science, 3 weeks of engineering, I meet with grade level teams. We walk through the kit, we walk through the science and make sure they're comfortable with that content. There's a lot of studies actually that show that pre-K through third grade teachers typically are some of the least comfortable in teaching the science content. And so we make sure that we're positioned to be experts and have authority on the science content that we're covering, that they're comfortable with the arc of the engineering kits. And then third, in their first time through an engineering challenge, I typically do a lot of co-teaching based on the comfort level of the teachers. So our first graders, when they did rockets and rovers, when they were actually launching rockets across the room, that was one where the teachers requested that I was there and I take the lead, and they could serve as more of a supplemental support. And then for my school that's in year 2, that role reversed this year. And the teacher took the lead, and I was there as the additional adult, you know, making sure that the rockets were flying away from children. And I set that expectation as my school caseload increases. In year 1, I provide a lot more co-teaching support, or even sample teaching, allowing teachers to observe this different approach to teaching, observe the coaching and observe the questioning and observe making kids do it themselves. Because even as early as kindergarten and first grade, we have a lot of learned helplessness. And so, modeling the language in which to encourage kids, in which to back up if a group is fighting and say, like, how can we figure this out? How can we problem solve? So in year one, I do a lot of sample teaching and co-teaching in addition to meeting and preparation during grade level plans. And then in year two, those roles reverse. And even as the year progresses, teachers get more and more comfortable with how the kits work and what the flow looks like and the scope of the lessons and including the literacy stories. And so it tends to be individualized based on the teacher's professional development plans as well.
All right, so we have a question from Christy. She's asking, is it possible to see the North Carolina rubric, or if there's somewhere online that she could find it?
Yeah, if you Google NC DPI STEM rubric, you can see that. I mean, it's open source on the Department of Public Instruction's website. And there's an elementary version, there's a middle school version, and a high school version. And there's also a paired engineering specific supplement. And it's not necessarily clear, but the way that they do evaluate that is you actually have to do both. So you have to have proficiency at both the STEM rubric attributes and the engineering supplement. But if you Google NCDPI STEM rubric, you should be able to find it.
Perfect. And then from Rhonda, so she's asking, did you receive extra funding for your program? Did you apply for grants? Also, are parents supportive, and how do you communicate with parents about what students are learning? And do you see an increase of parental support because you are a STEM school?
Yeah, so there's like 4 questions in there, so I'm going to try to make sure I hit them all. And I was thinking that I should have had a section on our family involvement. So the first, funding for our program. We've actually gone through a whole different school system leadership over the course of our 2 years. And so I will say that the funding in year 1 looked very different from the funding in year 2. Budgets are being cut, and that's actually why we love the approach that we take, because so much of it is masking tape, cardboard, tinfoil, pipe cleaners, and not expensive tools. So our budget, we did get slight increase of funds in year 1 of the program, and then I just wrote my 3rd budget, and it's been decreased. It was cut by about 60%, even as my schools increase. So it's something that we do have to be creative. We've got a local education foundation that has supported us over the last couple of years with some grants, and we just applied to do a math science partnership teacher development grant with the State Department that we're still waiting to hear from. We did just receive from Cognizant a Making the Future grant to do a STEM and Maker summer camp experience for our students. We've partnered with Wake Electric, we seek out a lot of grants. And the things like the Lego robotics, like that was something that only happened because we received a grant and were able to invest in that. So yes, we do seek out additional funding, and that's again where if I've got any district or admin level, having somebody in my role as a classroom teacher, there was no way that I had the time or capacity to do as much grant writing as I do now in my current role, where that's part of my explicit responsibilities, is to find and pursue additional funding through grant writing. Family outreach. So one, at our school we actually tonight have a choice fair. So we have 5 schools of choice at the elementary level in our district as of the next upcoming school year. 2 of those are STEM schools, and they're at different ends of the county. Our STEM school at the north end, which is the smaller one, we actually saw an increase of about 70 students, and initially we had an enrollment of about 180. We had 4 combination classes, and in year 1, I think we actually had 60 students increase, and that decreased our combo classes by 2, and we provided these choices for families. We also do semesterly, once a semester we have family STEM nights, where families get to come do engineering challenges and science challenges with their kids, and we've seen that involvement be really high as well. And our parents have been really wonderful supporters in a lot of our special initiatives. So we celebrate National Engineering Week every February, which is usually the week before Dr. Seuss his birthday for my early childhood educators. So we do a engineering week, and then we do a SUS science, technology, and engineering and math week. And we'll get lots of parent volunteers in. We actually have a surprising number of parent volunteers who are engineers and who are excited to be sending their kids to a school that talks about what it is they do. And so those parents come and visit and talk. And then we get a whole other subset of parents who are really great donators in terms of those inexpensive resources. So as part of an additional class list at the beginning of the year, we send home, like, please donate wax paper, balloons, straws, and masking tape. If you ask for toilet paper tubes, you will never get the end of them. Like, you'll have kids, even if you stopped asking in September, you'll have kids in March bringing you garbage bags full of paper towel tubes. And so we found that families are really able to contribute in the best way that they can. And we've also seen an incredibly positive response. A lot of this is anecdotal within our work with families, but I will have parents who are coming up to me saying, who I see in the pickup line and drop-off line when they're picking their child up from school, saying, oh my gosh, Natalie noticed that the bricks at Walmart were staggered. And she used that vocabulary, like, that's crazy. Or Jermaine built a water filter in our backyard this last weekend, and we tested it. And so I get a lot of those stories of parents seeing, one, the problem-solving manifest, two, seeing some of their shyer students or students who haven't enjoyed school before feeling success in a subject, and then three, seeing some of their quieter kids really just break out of the shell as they've practiced communication and collaboration a lot more.
All right. So another question from Christy. What adaptations do you see are needed, if any, for children who are English second language learners, or for students with disabilities? Or rather, how have you made sure that all students are included in the work?
Yes. So one, I will say that's one of the strands. Diversity and inclusivity in general is one of the strands of the STEM rubric, so it is a priority for us. Two, the amazing surprise is that those distinctions tend not to matter during their engineering challenges. We have a student who is diagnosed as EC. He spends most of his time in a separate classroom from his regular class, and he was the first student who got a parallel circuit to work with a light bulb and a buzzer with one power source using the cords, and then was able to explain to the class how he got it to work, and he was lecturing the gifted and talented students on what they were doing wrong. And so it really is something that we've seen ability and language sort of fall away because of how hands-on this is, and it's a place that sometimes has actually flipped the script, where our students who usually feel more successful are either, one, more afraid of failure, and so they don't take risks and they don't create things that work up to that failure point, or two, don't like that there's not a right answer, and so for them they have to develop in that social-emotional component, and we see our English language learners and our students with special needs really blossom and really see themselves as these capable, powerful, smart equals in the classroom, and so that's been really exciting. We do make some adaptations, especially from the EIE curriculum, not so much with our English language learners or our students with disabilities, but just in general, the kits are written to be able to be used by a 1st through 5th grade window. And so I do a lot of work with our pre-KK and 1st grade teams in adapting the resources that are supplied, especially the handouts, to one, make sure it's developmentally appropriate, and two, just to make sure that it's feasible and at that nexus of proximal development for our younger learners. So I have to do some adaptations just for their age, more so than based on ability.
Okay. From Jubilee, what would you recommend for a new STEAM teacher to help the principal and staff to carry out the STEAM visions and applications into reality with concrete practicalities? Can you also provide a list of resources for elementary STEAM or STEM?
So the first thing that I would say is utilize the 4 walls of your classroom. So if you are a classroom teacher and you are seeing, like, this should be a vision for my whole school, first and foremost, make sure that you've got that model classroom. Like that's one of the challenges in my role is part of me wants to go be the teacher so I can be like, this is what it should look like. So step one, turn yourself into like what it should look like so that you can be that model that other teachers can come in during their planning and see, so that other teachers and your principal alike can look at what kids are producing. Because a lot with STEM, we impose these artificial low expectations on what kids are actually capable of. And so it takes somebody brave to say, no, they can do it. No, kindergartners can code robotics. Like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you then what they did. And I'm going to invite you. There are some iterations of the design process that actually have publish or share as the final component. And so you could have expos where kids can show off what it is they did, and that's how you're going to shift mindsets if you see people who aren't living out the program on board. Two, and I'm not sure what state you're from, but I would say for us, being able to share this structure or system of guidelines of those 11 rubric attributes is something that, one, has positioned all of our teachers to find something in which they can be developing that aligns with their strengths. So when I have some of my teachers who aren't necessarily comfortable with the project-based learning component, they can be doing more on cultivating creativity and innovation, or they can be doing more in their classroom within the interdisciplinary connections or the career pipelines and exposing kids to multiple STEM careers. And so it's allowed a broader scope of access points so that collectively as a school team, we can all be driving towards the same vision. And so I would say usually across a whole school, or even if I'm an administrator, if I'm not clear on what engineering is and I'm not clear on what this looks like, I don't necessarily have that concrete direction on where to go. In terms of additional resources, teachengineering.org, EFGI, which is, or EGFI, Engineering Go For It, is a great online resource. PBS Design Squad, the educators component, has a lot of smaller challenges. For early childhood, Curious George, Sesame Street, and Tinkerbell all have been, there are teams behind those three franchises, I think, who have a specifically targeted STEAM approach. So especially for pre-K, looking at Curious George and Tinkerbell and Sesame Street, those were big priorities, and they've got some challenges that you can find online that are pretty simple. Discover E, as in Discover Engineering, not Discovery with a Y, is the team that really supports resources on National Engineering Week, and they also have a broad range of pre-K through 12 challenges or handouts or videos. We use EIE.org, which is that Engineering is Everywhere, and if you go to that website, to EIE.org, you're able to access the engineering adventures and the Engineering Everywhere, and those are two programs where the curriculum is free for download. Paige Paxton has been a great resource that we use where we pull in, and we've seen kids really appreciate the characters, the puzzles, and the simple texts. For our pre-K and K teachers, you know, I've brought them, if you're familiar with some of the upper grades, like the Max Adam graphic novel, and they're like, no, Miss Penderak, that's not appropriate. Or Rosie Revere Engineer, which is a great story, but it's less of a character that the kids can really come back to. Whereas we found with Paige and Paxton, kids really being like, oh, when we use our iPads, like we like technology just like Paxton does. And that's been easier for them to grasp onto as a character that can be an exemplar. The other thing that we've done is even just like your regular teaching toolbox, we've gotten Scholastic. They have some science shoebox centers that our early childhood teachers have really enjoyed. Little things like for systems thinking, one of those habits of mind, putting some flashlights in a box that are all put together wrong. So in one, the batteries are flipped. In one, the bulb is out. In one, it's not screwed all the way. And asking kids that question of like, can you fix it? And so shoebox centers from Scholastic. There was another one. Oh, Lakeshore Learning Centers. There's more and more of those ongoing STEM resources. And those are typically things that I've seen respond. People on grant sources like Donors Choose are really invested in being able to give like the STEM in a box that you can get from Lakeshore.
All right. All right. So we have a time for maybe one or two more questions. So another question from James: what was the most challenging experience? What was the most challenging experience that teachers have in common during this shift of instruction?
So one of the things for us was just that all of the other changes in the district didn't stop. And so all of my schools got brand new principals at the same time that they had a brand new program, at the same time that our district was in year 2 of balanced literacy. And so it was something that in the beginning felt like an other. And I think a lot of that was, and it was just like an additional change. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, was one, making sure that we had this sort of longer scoped scope and sequence even for our teachers, in being able to set expectations and make the change more incremental, but at the same time maintaining the meaningful shift in pedagogy. And so I think that was like a lot of our teachers, new principal, some new teachers on the team, and a new program, and life is really unsettled at this point. And we had a new superintendent as well, and so all of those changes, I think, was the biggest challenge. The second has just been, in both years, we've had a really long streak of snow days that happened in the midst of challenges. And so, like last year, we aligned the solar oven unit during the same, like when they were supposed to learn energy transfer, which usually happens in the winter. And we didn't figure out that, like, oh, in February, that may not be the best month to do solar ovens. So I think just having that common sense filter, like, we had a lot of lessons learned our first year.
Perfect. So then one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Do you see challenges in adapting curriculum down the line now that you're implementing STEM earlier in a student's educational experience?
Can I clarify?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that, like, the trickle up, when you say down the line, are you saying in, like, in the middle and high school levels?
Yeah, in the middle and high school.
So we had, as a result of the small school initiative, we actually found that we had a hole in our county. And this is really where we wanted to start intentionally with elementary, because our high schools, we had a school of health and life science, we had a school of engineering, and we had a few high school programs that, one, we were noticing we weren't getting kids to it prepared to take advantage of this Project Lead the Way, of the early college. We have a partnership with a community college that has a brand new mechatronics and biofuels programs, but we are not graduating kids who can pass the entry-level circuitry prereqs. And so when we saw that gap, we said, how do we create a group of students who then could take these high-tech jobs if they're able to compete? And it was like, we need to start early. And we need to eventually close the gap between what we're offering in our high school and in our community college and even in the colleges in the Triangle. And so that's also where we're doing a slow, sustainable growth. So, like, right now with my middle school, I work primarily with our 6th grade team. We have offered our STEM electives to 7th and 8th grade, mostly because the middle school just didn't have many electives to offer. But we're taking the 5th graders who started at our STEM elementary last year and making sure that our STEM program continues with them as they grow older and older. So with them, we're implementing the changes in a sustainable way where there shouldn't be a discrepancy in their ongoing experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. All right, so that is all the time that we have for questions right now. And obviously, if you guys have any other additional questions, you can contact Bryn directly. Her email address is pendrakbk@gcs.k12.nc.us. And then, so yes, you can reach out to her directly. If you are interested in receiving a certificate for professional development credit hours, please feel free to reach out to me at Kelly, Kelley, at honeybco.com. And if you want to, if you missed something, or if there was a part of the presentation that you can't remember, we are going to provide the webinar transcript and recording by this time next week, so you can tune in at your leisure whenever you want to. And then obviously you can also tap into the webinar transcript to also, you can also leverage the webinar transcript as well. So thank you again, Bryn, for all the wonderful insight and information that you provided. It seemed like everybody got a lot out of, your experience and advice.
Happy to be here.
Yes, so thank you again for tuning in. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.